Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Command Point. My name is Ryan, and today I'm joined by my co-host Shane.
How's it going?
It's going pretty good. Shane, today we are finally doing our Drukhari deep dive.
Yeah, I mean, we both just played a whole tournament of Drukhari.
Yeah.
You're probably about to play another tournament with Drukhari, so I mean, we have some experience with the faction at this point. We've kind of piled through a lot of it, so felt like a pretty good time, right?
Yeah. Okay, so I guess going into this deep dive, we should probably start off with their power from pain abilities.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of like one of the things that makes them so unique. To my understanding, there's nothing like it outside of Drukhari, right?
Yeah.
Basically, they're getting like a new ability every round.
Yeah.
And it's like they're good abilities. They're like
they're good. Yeah, they're basically getting like a whole new subfaction trait every round going forward. And then the only thing, like the only faction ability that I can think of that comes close to this is kind of the Adeptus Mechanicus Canicles of the Omnisci, I believe.
Yeah,
but it's
that
not.
You get to pick, and it's like it doesn't stack. Whereas this, it's one order, and they stack.
Yeah, so you can like build an entire game plan around that, which is very powerful. So starting at round one, they get just every model in the faction just gets a 6-up Feel No Pain. Well, not every model. Every model that is power from pain gets a 6-up Feel No Pain. Which is just fantastic, because I mean, you look at factions like Asriani, where a lot of in a lot of tournaments you see them taking Althway just to get that 6-up Feel No Pain, and that's like that's the whole thing. With Drukhari, they just get this on top of what other sub-faction they start off with, and then it just snowballs up from there.
Yes, power from pain. The first level, that Feel No Pain is just... Feel No Pains are amazing. A lot of people will play Drukhari, and there's a lot of like Drukhari, like one-trick players, I guess, who like only play Drukhari, who might take it for granted. But I Feel No Pain, because there's going to be games where it just doesn't ever feel like it's happening. Like you'll never get that save. But it is so nice, especially for multi-win models, which there are a few for Drukhari. There's not many, but there are a few. And when it does come into play, it's pretty huge.
Yeah. So what do they get in round two, battle round two?
So the other Drukhari ability that you get in the second round for Power from Pain it's called Eager to Flay. So basically, you can re-roll the dice when determining how far this model moves when it advances or charges. So we're talking about like subfactions, how these are basically subfaction bonuses. You can compare it to like Heretic Astartes, Renegade Chapters, or regular Astartes, Black Templars. Except this is even better because they also get to re-roll the advance, not just the charge, which is really nice because Drukhari have really high movement. They're like extremely quick. And as far as the charging goes, they have a ton of super strong models in melee, so that this is going to come in handy pretty much every game.
Yeah, for sure. So building off like their melee prowess, is in the third battle round they get Flensing Fury, where they add 1 to hit rolls for their models in the fight phase. It's honestly like it's unbelievable that they just get all these abilities. Like, to be frank, that's a great ability. I mean, everything's basically going to be hitting on 2s, bar anything that has like a flesh wound or something.
Yeah, I mean, the other way to look at it too is like it's almost like transhuman physiology in a way, because like your models that were flesh wounded from rounds 1 and 2 are now hitting at their normal weapon skill.
Yeah, right.
In addition to it basically being like Space Wolves without the charge requirement. So it's just you're always +1 to hit in melee. It's crazy. Yeah, hitting on 2s with some of these models is just insane.
Yeah. So what do they get for round 4?
Emboldened by Bloodshed. It's a reroll failed nerve test for this model. This can like save games.
Yeah, literally.
It's like pretty good time to get that, to be honest. So yeah, in the 4th round, suddenly when you're at probably the biggest risk of failing a lot of nerve tests, not anymore. Drukhari can now re-roll their nerve tests and bail you out. This is huge. Morale is one of the biggest feels bads in the game, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
And to just be able to kind of have their own answer to it that would otherwise be unique to, like, again, Astartes with, like, They Shall Know No Fear. It's just craziness.
Yeah. And then for rounds 5 and up, they get Mantle of Agony. So subtract 1 from the leadership characteristics of enemy models that are within 6 inches of any models from your kill team with this bonus. So why am I even talking about this when typically in competitive kill team, it's a 4-round game? There actually is a subfaction that we'll talk about later on that allows you to basically you add 1 to whatever the battle round is when determining what power from pain ability you get. It's an ability for one of the Cabals, Cabal of the Black Heart, I think. So instead of starting off with just a 6-up feel no pain on round 1, you also start off with Eager to Flay. And then so by round 3, you're getting Emboldened to Bloodshed. And that is huge in a lot of games.
For sure.
Yeah.
Honestly, and like with Mantle of Agony, with the leadership penalty, with a model like a Clavex, which I believe already has a leadership or a penalty to enemy
That's
models. Right. This like stack. So suddenly your leadership 6 Orc Boy is leadership 4 on round 4. It's like, oh my God, you're already struggling with morale at this point. It's like, geez.
Okay. So moving on from power from pain, let's go ahead and start looking at the models that Drukhari have access to. Do you want to start us off with the... just pick whatever model you want to start off with, and we'll go with that.
Well, Cabalite Warriors are at the top, so I feel like I'm just going to default to that.
Okay.
Cabalite Warriors, I mean, their data sheet is basically the same as like a Guardian Defender that Eldar would get. You know, It's just the Strength 3, Toughness 3. It's 7-inch movement. It's an elf.
Yeah.
They're armed with Splinter Rifles, which are basically rapid fire 24-inch range. But it's 0 AP, 1 damage. But the catch to it is they're poison weapons, which basically means they will always wound on Strength 4, or on a wound roll of 4. So against Toughness 4, they're Strength 4. Against Toughness 3, they're Strength 3. Against Toughness 5, they're Strength 5, and so on. The whole poison thing doesn't really ever seem useful to me. It seems like it's more unhelpful in your wounding on 4s, which is what a lot of them are, although there are a few exceptions to that we'll talk about. You can take a Cabalite Gunner. Well, you can take 2 Cabalite Gunners, and you can take 1 Sybarite. So the Cabalite Gunners are like that's the special thing.
They're the reason why you get a box of Cabalites.
Yes, you're not getting it for the basic regular Cabalite Warriors. Not even really for the Sybarite, if I'm being honest.
Yeah.
It's the weapons that the Cabalite Gunners can take. So one can take a Splinter Cannon or Dark Lance, and then the other can take a Shredder or Blaster.
Yeah.
So basically this is split pretty like cleanly between like Splinter Cannon is probably better against T3. Dark Lance is probably better against T4. Shredder, again, probably better against T3. Blaster, good against T4. Do you want to talk about the ones that stuck out to you most here? Because I think I know what you're thinking.
Yeah, so the first one is obviously the Dark Lance. 36-inch range, heavy 1, strength 8, AP -4, D6 damage. It's pretty insane. Whatever Cabalite Gunner, or you take your Cabalite Gunner with him, you make him a sniper specialist, and that weapon is just devastating when it hits. and it also feels very bad when you miss with it. You know, you only get 4 chances to shoot with this weapon. You really got to make them count. And then probably like the number one special weapon for me, it's got to be the blaster, right? You know, it's basically an 18-inch melt-a-gun.
Yep, pretty much. Yeah, I mean it's assault, but it's assault 1, 18 inches. It's basically the same thing. I just don't think it has the half range 2d6.
Yeah, that's right.
But yeah, really good. Having a Dark Lance and a blaster, especially on some of the shorter range maps where you can really make use of the blaster, because you can pretty much always make use of that Dark Lance.
Yeah.
Just sticking him in the back of your deployment zone. Maybe not on arena. Sometimes it's hard.
I would say even on some arena maps though, he's
for
useful.
Sure, yeah.
Just to be kind of like a deterrent.
Yeah, and especially with one of the subfactions that we're going to talk about in a second, these weapons are just bonkers.
Yeah.
And then I guess we should talk about the Sybarite a little bit. It's kind of a weird model. It's like the Sergeant model. You can only take 1. The only difference in the data sheet is LD8 instead of 7 and 2 attacks instead of 1.
Mm-hmm.
It can take a Power Sword or Agonizer. So the Agonizer, it's poison, so it's wounding on 4s. And I believe it's AP2, 1 damage.
Yeah.
And the Power Sword, it is a Power Sword. It is Strength User, AP3. Power Sword is not going to be that great on the Sybarite because it is Strength 3. There's really no workaround unless you make it a Zealot, which you're probably not going to end up making a Sybarite a Zealot for various reasons that we'll get into later, I guess.
Yeah.
It can also take a Phantasm grenade launcher, which is a really weird weapon.
It is a weird weapon.
I don't know how many times you've actually used it. I know you don't really run with the Sybarite too often. I don't either.
Yeah, I think the only time I've used that grenade launcher is when I'm looking to fill some points in games of Commanders. Like, that's basically it.
I'll talk about it because it's such a weird weapon. It's basically 18-inch assault D3, strength 1. You're hearing that correctly. Strength 1, 0 AP, 1 damage. So you're probably thinking, there's no way this is ever going to do anything. You're never killing anything with this weapon. The reason you use it is because of the special ability. So if you even get a hit with it, you subtract 1 from the leadership characteristic of the model that got hit until the end of the battle round. So, I mean, it's not that useful.
Yeah.
If a model has a flesh wound, you probably want to be shooting it with an actual weapon just to get it off the board.
Absolutely.
Rather than trying to make it fail a leadership test. Beyond that, it can take it can replace their Splinter Rifle with a Splinter Pistol or Blast Pistol. The Blast Pistol is like it's basically like a blaster, but it's a pistol.
Yeah, it's got 6-inch range. Yeah,
it's kind of like the Inferno pistol.
Yeah,
it hits like a truck, but it's 6-inch range and it's a pistol. So not going to run to do it too often. And then the Splinter Pistol is it's a pistol that's poison. It's 12-inch range. It's 0 AP, 1 damage. Yeah. So I mean, I think that covers the models themselves, but I guess we should talk about the specific subfactions that these models get.
Yeah, Drukhari, they're kind of weird in that there's basically 3 different groups of factions all tied to specific models. So it's not like Space Marines where for the most part you can just pick anything and choose a chapter tactics that you want to go with and everything's okay. You kind of got to pick what you're trying to enhance, I guess. And you just gotta be more conscientious with your decisions when it comes to list building with these guys. So yeah, let's take a look at their elite subfactions.
Yeah, so the first one, I guess we kind of mentioned it earlier. It's Cabal the Blackheart. It's basically treating the battle round as if it's 1 higher than it actually is for the purpose of power from pain.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of weird because on paper this sounds great, but I feel like the Cabalites are the worst models. Or I guess in terms of benefiting from power from pain. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I
Like-
100% agree.
Like re-rolling charges turn 1. This is mostly a shooty profile.
Yeah, these are
maybe the
shooting
Sybarite.
models.
Like the Sybarite might like it, but that's about
Yeah.
it. For that reason, I don't really think I'd look to Blackheart too often. I mean, would you?
I would if I wanted to run the Archon model in games of Commanders. We're not really going to go too deep into that, but like that model is a melee powerhouse with some of the stuff that he can do. So having like literally just taking this subfaction trait specifically to buff the Archon and not even any of the other models in your list, that's when I would be looking at Cabal the Blackheart. But in games at the 125 points level, at the 100 points level, there's definitely some better options there. That's for sure.
Yes. Speaking of which, let's go down to Cabal the Flayed Skull.
Yes.
This is the obvious, like, amazing one, in my opinion.
Yeah, this is like the one that we've seen in competitive pop up over and over again on open formats.
Yeah.
So models
I'll
in
read
your
it, I guess. No, you go ahead.
okay. Models in your kill team do not suffer the penalties to hit rolls for the target of their attacks being obscured or because of intervening terrain. So, like, this makes it makes your Dark Lance Gunner hitting on 2s anytime he's buffed by a comm specialist, basically, as long as the target model's within 18 inches. So you make him a sniper spec, so he's rerolling 1s, and it's just great. That's why you take this subfaction trait, is to buff up that Dark Lance Gunner.
Yeah, basically, like you deploy him and you ready him, and then anything within 18 inches
dies.
I mean, you assume you have a comms nearby and you're a sniper. Suddenly, you're with this like meltagun. You're hitting on 2s, re-rolling 1s at strength 8, AP 4, D6 damage. It's just point and click.
Yeah,
it's crazy. It's like a Cybolt at that point, right? I mean, except you get to pick your. I don't even know.
There is the chance of you re-rolling your hit roll of 1 into another one. It's happened to me before, and it is the ultimate feels bad. But the upside's so huge with it. It's like, this is it. Like, this is the one for Cabalates.
Yeah, I guess with Cybolt you can perils. So at least when you do this with the Dark Lance, you don't explode. I guess.
yeah, you just miss.
I guess let's go down to Poison Tongue, Cabal the Poison Tongue.
Mm-hmm.
So reroll wound rolls of 1 made for melee weapons and poisoned weapons used by models in your kill team. And for the purpose of this obsession, a poison weapon is any weapon that wounds on a particular roll, like we've talked about.
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, I've never even considered this. I don't think I really would. You're not really building your cabals around the poison weapons.
No.
Like, you weren't building it around the splinter rifles and stuff. You're building it around the Dark Lance and the blaster, which are not poison weapons. They're just power weapons, basically.
Yeah. I could see if I say this with some hesitation, but I could see, like, if all you have in your Drukhari list, you only have Cabalate models, then I can see, like, the potential to justify this for taking it, right? Because you want to be getting the most out of the models that you actually have. But even then, it's like, making that Dark Lance always hit on 2s is really, really good with Flayed Skull. So I think it just edges it out for me.
Yeah, no, I would agree. I would never really look at Poison Tongue too much.
Yeah.
If at all. Probably the worst one that I think they can take. Although outside of Commanders, the Black card is pretty useless too. So I don't even know.
Yeah.
I guess let's go down to Obsidian Rose, Cabal the Obsidian Rose.
Yeah.
Do you want to take that one?
Yeah. So They models in your kill team do not suffer the penalty to hit rolls for their attacks that target enemy models at long range. So, kind of recently we played in TAO, and that board was pretty sparse for terrain. We both took Cabal of the Flayed Skull as like for our Cabalite models that we had on our roster. Do you think looking back, there could be an argument made for taking Cabal of the Obsidian Rose instead?
Yeah, this is something I realized after I had already submitted my roster. But I had the option on my roster for a blaster sniper, which I never took. I would have taken him in an instance where I felt like I didn't need the Dark Lance.
Mm-hmm.
And he would have been like my only Cabalite period, I think.
Right.
But the blaster sniper, because it's only 18 inches, on that board, it was so open that there's so many instances where there was an unobscured model and I wasn't even getting my penalty. But what I was running into with the blaster was long range.
Mm-hmm.
And there was always something that was long range. And once you're within 9 inches with a blaster, you're kind of in danger of getting charged, or maybe something else will shoot you.
Right.
So I think with the blaster specifically, if you're ever running a list where your only Cabalite option in the whole list is going to be the blaster sniper or something, I think it's actually better to have Obsidian Rose, because suddenly everything within 18 inches, like if there's a single model within 18 inches of you that's unobscured, which could easily happen, you're hitting it on a 3, rerolling 1s.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas with the Dark Lance, I don't think I'd ever want to take Obsidian Rose, because 36-inch range, you're not going to run into long range that often, but what you are going to run into is obscured models within 18 inches.
Yeah.
That's almost just my 2 cents.
Yeah. I think I would have rather have gone with just like what you were describing of using the Cabalite Gunner with the blaster, taking it with Cabal of the Obsidian Rose, because you can be a lot more mobile with that model. Whereas with the Dark Lance, you're kind of just, it's like you said, on turn 1, you kind of just ready that model up. Your opponent can still like play around that, move them behind pieces of terrain. Like there were pieces of terrain, but it was very hard to be holding objectives and be completely outside line of sight. But yeah, I think it would have been, I think it would have been worked better on that packet.
Yeah, okay. It is a bit unfortunate too. We kind of glossed over this, but the specialisms for Cabalites, you can't make any Cabalite a heavy spec, which the Dark Lance is a heavy weapon, unfortunately. So if you're going to move that model at all, it's going to take the -1. You try and offset that by either not moving it, just kind of planting it and readying it, or kind of always keeping the comms buff nearby to I guess, reset the ballistic skill, so to speak, back to 3 up.
Right. All right. So that's Cabalites, basically. Would you want to talk about witches or racks now?
Let's do witches. Why not?
Okay. So witches they're a very close combat oriented. They've got combat drugs, Shane. These witches have combat drugs. Want to go over those?
Yeah, they're the only models, Drukhari models, that get combat drugs. So basically the way this works is if you're running witches at the very start of the game, you will roll a d6, and there's this table that you'll consult, and depending on what you roll, you get a certain bonus that's going to last the whole game. It's super RNG based. It's really weird. But what's nice is just about all of these are at the very least decent. And you can kind of make builds that don't rely on combat drugs or any particular combat drugs roll, meaning that whatever you end up getting here, it's just a bonus on top of what you already are banking on. So I guess I'll go over them. So there's 6 bonuses. If you roll a 1, you get Adrenalite, which is +1 to the attack's characteristic. This is really nice. This is one of the better options you can get. Suddenly your witches have, your witch fighters and your Hackatrix have 3 and 4 attacks respectively instead of 2 and 3. That's a pretty big thing. Grave Lotus. This is huge. Takes them up to strength 4 from strength 3. Or if you have a certain subfaction ability that we'll talk about later, it could take them up to strength 5, which is massive.
Mm-hmm.
Hypex on a 3, +2 to move characteristics, so they become movement 10. That's very good. 4 is Painbringer. They get +1 to toughness. This might be my favorite one. Their biggest issue is how easy it is to wound them and in turn force them to fail their saves or kill them in the shooting phase before they can even get in.
Yeah.
To have toughness 4 on these models is a pretty big deal. 5 is Serpentine. I don't know how that's pronounced. It's +1 to weapon skill characteristic. This is good. They become 2-up weapon skill instead of 3-up. The only downside of this is the third round of Power from Pain no longer really does anything.
Yeah.
Outside of offsetting flesh wounds, I guess. And then there's 6 Splinter Mind, +2 to leadership characteristics. So leadership 9 and leadership 10 for the Hackatrix. That's pretty crazy. So I mean, all of those are good, right?
Yeah, they're all good.
I mean, there's going to be instances where you're like, oh, dang, I didn't really want the leadership, or, the movement doesn't excite me. They're already pretty fast. But it's not something that's going to hurt you. It's always going to help you. Some are better than others, undoubtedly. But, yeah.
Yeah, to me, it's just hard in the list building phase with witches. It's like, okay, I'm going to be taking certain pieces of war gear, and then depending upon how I roll on the combat drugs, some of those weapons that I've taken either become redundant because of their increases to strength that they give the user, or just stuff like that. Increased amount of attacks. It can either become redundant, or it can greatly benefit also, but it's just hard to plan around how you're going to be running them when there's this element of RNG to it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure. So I guess let's talk really quick about the weapon options that the witch fighters can take.
Mm-hmm.
So they can replace their Splinter Pistol and Hackatrix Blade, which, by the way, a Hackatrix Blade, which is what all the witches can basically start with for free. It's just, strength user, 0 AP, and you get an additional attack. So the witch fighters go from 2 attacks to 3 if they have that. It's very weak. This is not what you're kitting your fighters out with. So they can replace this with Hydra Gauntlets, Razor Flails, or a Chardonnet and Impaler. So let's talk about these options really quick, because this is where the choices come in, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
So, in my opinion, the best out of all of these is the Chardonnet and Impaler.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
How do you feel about this?
I agree with you. I
Yeah.
think there is a case to be made for the reroll failed wound rolls for the Hydra Gauntlets, because you're also getting an additional attack when you use that weapon. So
they're all 3 of these are strength user. So you're going to be working off your strength 3 or 4, because you're probably going to be taking a certain subfaction. So the Chardonnet and Impaler is AP 1. It's damage 2, making it one of the few multi-damage options that you're going to have on the list.
Yeah.
And each time the bearer fights, it can make 1 additional attack. All 3 of the weapons the witch fighters can take offer an additional attack. So, again, without any specialisms, witch fighters are looking at 3 attacks, potentially 4 if you get the combat drugs for it. But so Chardonnet and Impaler is good because it's multi-damage. It's AP 1. The other options, Razor Flails and Hydra Gauntlets, are also AP 1, but they're 1 damage. The differences is so Hydra Gauntlets, you reroll all failed wound rolls, which is really good. I've actually found out that re-rolling all failed wound rolls at strength 4 is better than having strength 5 or something.
Oh, really? That's interesting.
Yeah, I think the math works out that way.
Okay.
And then the razor flails is you reroll all failed hit rolls. This is less useful to me because a lot of the time you don't need to be rerolling failed hit rolls. It's easier to hit. You're going to be encountering less difficulty hitting than wounding.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, the points cost wise, the razor flails and the Hydra gauntlets are 2 points, and the Chardonnet and Impaler is also 2 points. So they're all the same cost. It really just depends on what it is that you're going for.
Yeah, this is when the tailoring starts with these witches, is just you're able to plug in whatever weapon you want and not really have to worry about, am I over points, am I under points? So you can kind of have like a few different builds in a witch list that all come out to the same point cost if you take one of these 3 weapons each time for each of your witch fighters and your Hackatrix.
Yeah. And then speaking of the Hackatrix can take a Power Sword or Agonizer, much like the Sybarite that we talked about earlier. I guess it's better on this model, the Power Sword, that is, because we'll talk about it again.
Yeah, when we get to the
Hackatrix.
Yes.
They can also take that weird grenade launcher, the Phantasm grenade launcher, and they can replace their Splinter Pistol with a Blast Pistol. So, I mean, honestly, the Hackatrix isn't even better in my eyes than the Witch Fighters. The Witch Fighters are the real meats here.
Absolutely.
So, they also have a unique ability called No Escape.
Mm-hmm.
If an infantry model within 1 inch of any enemy models with this ability would fall back, the controlling players roll off, and the model that would fall back can only do so if the controlling player, or if the player controlling it wins the roll off. So if you ever want to fall back from a witch, you have to basically roll off against the witch player.
Yeah.
And if you don't roll higher than them, meaning on a tie, they win. If you don't roll higher, you just don't get to fall back.
Yeah.
Pretty interesting ability. It's come into play a few times when I've played with witches.
Mm-hmm.
Really, these models are they are very good in melee, especially against like T3, I would say.
Oh, absolutely.
Like specifically the Hydra gauntlets are really good against T3 just by getting like volume of attacks through, just forcing lots of armor saves. And then the Chardonnet and Impaler is always scary. Multi-damage is super important.
It is.
So do we want to talk about the cults? Right at the top, there's the Cult of Strife. So again, just like with the Cabals, this subfaction will only apply to your witch models. So none of your other models will get this, just the witches. So with the Cult of Strife, you can make 1 additional attack in the fight phase of the model in your kill team if it charged, was charged, or made a pile-in move granted by the heroic intervention commander tactic. So I don't think you're ever going to really look at this, right? They already have a lot of attacks.
Yeah.
Doesn't fix their weakness, which is strength 3.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they're
I would like even against toughness 3, it's like no.
Yeah, I'd rather just have strength 4.
Yeah, exactly. So moving on to the strength 4, Cult of the Cursed Blade. Increase the strength characteristic of models from in your kill team by 1. In addition, when you take a nerve test for a model in your kill team, subtract 1 from the result. So that +1 strength is huge for witches.
Yep. It is. It fixes the problem, right?
Yeah.
Like that's their only problem outside of like they don't have a lot of AP, outside of like a power sword maybe. That fixes the issue with witches. The like major kind of sticks out like a sore thumb issue.
Yeah.
I will say I always forget that it has that little extra thing, the nerve test bonus.
Yeah, the first one is so good it's just completely overshadowed. For the first half of this subfaction.
Yeah, I mean, if you get the +2 leadership power from combat drugs, rather, and then you have Cult of the Cursed Blade, it's almost like Necron levels of like leadership.
It is.
Where it's like
it's
they're
ridiculous.
just never going to fail. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then there's Cult of the Red Grief, which is in the running for one of the worst subfactions you can take, period.
Yeah.
You can reroll charge rolls for models in your kill team. So just an FYI, they do get power from pain. So they already get to reroll charge rolls starting at the second round.
Yeah. It's redundant.
Yeah. You're very rarely charging round one anyway.
Yeah.
Like if you just really wanted to get your strength 3 witches in round 1, I don't think that's good.
No.
Personally.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem very good to me at all.
No.
Don't take this.
One thing before we move on from witches that I wanted to mention that I don't think we made as explicit as we wanted it to be was the fact that they have a 4-up invuln save, but that is only in the fight phase. Yeah.
So yeah, if that stands to that's actually kind of important. So if they're in combat and like they've charged last round but they're still in, if they get shot with a pistol in the shooting phase, they don't get that invuln. It's only in the fight phase.
Yeah.
It's not just in combat. Yeah, I mean I like witches like aesthetically, and I don't think they're that bad. They can certainly work, especially on Arena. Like I know for a fact back at BAO we had some people running witches on that format that were having some success. I don't know if it was ever the strongest thing, but I'm sure you can take it decently far, especially against Toughness 3.
Yeah. I think it all just comes down to play style. So moving on to the third, I guess, subgroup, the Drukhari, they got access to racks in the Elites book. These models are absolutely fantastic. I am loving them right now.
They are. So, I mean, you can like split all 3 of the types into like different archetypes. Like Cabalite Warriors being like offensive ranged, Witches being like offensive close combat, and then Racks is like just like durable.
Yeah. It's just they're just a wall of flesh.
Yeah, they're almost like a defensive type where they're not going to be putting out nearly as much offensive output most of the time as Witches and Cabalites, but their resiliency is what's going to carry them. So Toughness 4 is the obvious one.
Yeah.
This is fantastic. They are 7-inch movement. And they get a built-in 5-up invulnerable save. So we'll talk about this, but
yeah.
they're usually going to end up having a 4-up invulnerable save, which is for those that are unaware, racks are these are 8-point models, like a basic rack is 8 points. The gunners are going to be 9. The Akathist, which is the sergeant rack, is going to be 9. Toughness 4, 5-up and Toughness 4, 4-up invuln is going to end up being really strong for you.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk a little bit about the rack gunner options?
Yeah, so the rack gunner can take a liquefier gun, which has 8-inch range, assault D6, strength 3, armor piercing characteristic is randomly determined by a roll of a D3, and it does 1 damage. And it auto hits, just like a flamer would.
Yeah. This is the only Drukhari flamer, if I'm not mistaken, right?
I believe so, yeah. They're only sort of like flamer equivalent. So this weapon's fantastic. When you make your rack gunner a demo specialist, it's a flamer. It's an 8-inch flamer. Potentially AP3. That's huge.
It's got crazy variants too.
It does, but on Arena, it's like the way to go with the rack gunner.
Because you could either get 6 shots AP3, or you can get 1 shot AP1.
Yeah.
It is nice to have a flamer with AP, even if it is strength 3. I mean, you can work around that with the demo specialist.
Mm-hmm.
It can be tough to play against, for sure.
Yeah.
And then there's the Ostefactor.
Yes. So this is a weapon that's very underrated, I think, and that is simply because up until recently, we haven't really seen people take like shooty racks because that's it's just like not a thing that you can do. And if you're going to take shooty Drukhari, more often than not, you're going to wind up going with the Cabalites because of their Dark Lance and their Blaster Cabalite Gunner options, right? So the Ostefactor, it is a 24-inch range, Assault 1, AP 3, it's 1 damage, and it has an ability where this weapon always wounds on a roll of 2 or higher. If a model is taken out of action by an attack made with this weapon, roll a d6 for each model within 2 inches of that model. On a roll of 5 up, that model suffers a mortal wound. So the roll of the d6 is like that's cute. You can't really rely on it, but that's a nice bonus. But that always wounding on a 2 up, that is great for racks. That is it. And it's an assault weapon, so the threat range is a lot larger than you think it is, just looking at that 24-inch range profile. I've been using this weapon to great effect in my World Wide Open prep games with racks.
Yeah, for all intents and purposes, that little asterisk where it says strength, you might as well just put 12 there because it's wounding everything on a 2. It is a really strong weapon. I mean, obviously there's the downside that it is only 1 shot, but still, I think the potential of what it can do is definitely intriguing.
Yeah.
And I want to talk a little bit about, before we talk about the Akathist, who is obviously an amazing model, all racks are armed with a weapon called Homunculus Tools. It's and all racks have 2 attacks, and with the Akathist having 3 attacks. And they have weapon skill 3. So Homunculus Tools are basically like poison weapon. Basically, it always wounds on a roll of 4. It's AP 0. It's 1 damage. So there are instances against like, say you're fighting against like a Gretchen or like Ryan or Rouse or something.
Yeah.
Don't use the Homunculus Tools in that situation because you're actually going to be wounding on 3s if you just use your basic fists, I guess.
Yeah, like your basic close combat weapon, I think is what it's called. And this is something that every model in Kill Team is equipped with, is a basic close combat weapon.
Something that I think people haven't thought about, because I've seen people use their Homunculus Tools when fighting like Ryan or Rouse, and I'm just like, no, what are you thinking? Like, you could just hit them with your fist.
Yes.
And then, so we have the Akathist, who is the Sergeant equivalent. The only difference for him is LD8, 3 attacks instead of 2. You get the idea. The Akathist has a few interesting options. They can take an Agonizer, which is that, poison weapon that wounds on a 4 always, and it's AP 2, damage 1. They can take an Electro-Corrosive Whip, which is it's poison, wounds on a 4 all the time, but it is AP 2, damage 2. So this is one of the stronger options. They can take a Flesh Gauntlet, which is something that they have a lot of weapons that they can take. But the Flesh Gauntlet is something that it's strength user, AP 0, damage 1, but it basically just has mortal wound upside. On a wound roll of 6, you do a mortal wound in addition. You're usually not going to take this. They can take a Mind Phase Gauntlet, which basically a Mind Phase Gauntlet, it's again strength user, AP 0, damage 2. This is like a weird one.
Yeah, it is a weird one.
I mean, it's at that point, I think I'd rather just have. You're not going to wound very often with it because you're strength user, which is 3.
Yeah.
Scissor Hand is it's a poison weapon. It wounds on a 4 always, and it is AP 1 damage. I would almost never take the Scissor Hand. And then my personal favorite, just on like a personal level, is the Venom Blade. I ran this all the time in TAO. It is always wounds on a 2, much like the Ostefactor that rack gunners can take. AP 0, damage 1. So which of these do you kind of like see the most use for?
Oh, definitely the Venom Blade. Definitely the Venom Blade. You take the Akathist, you make him a combat specialist, you give him the Venom Blade, and you're getting 4 attacks, hitting on 3s, turn 3, he's hitting on 2s, and then you're wounding on 2s all the time. It's a ridiculous model.
Yeah. The alternative is if you're against like an elite team with like good armor, good save characteristic, you probably want to run the electric corrosive whip.
Yeah.
Just because, yes, you're wounding on a 4, but with 4 attacks, turn 3, you're hitting on 2s. You're going to get enough hits that you should be able to get 1 to 2 wounds most of the time. And then that AP 2 damage is going to hit like a truck. So
yep. That's all you need.
Yeah, but also the Akathist can take a Hex Rifle, Liquefier Gun, or Stinger Pistol in addition to the melee weapon.
Yeah.
So do you want to talk about this a little bit?
Yeah, so we already went through the Liquefier Gun, so I'm just going to talk about the Hex Rifle. It is 36-inch, heavy 1, strength 4, AP 1, 1 damage. A model firing a Hex Rifle does not suffer the penalty to hit rolls for the target being at long range, just like a Space Marine Sniper Rifle. Each time you roll a wound roll of 6 up for this weapon, it inflicts a mortal wound in addition to any other damage. Just like the Ostefactor, this is a great ranged option for this sort of like subfaction of Drukhari, I guess we could call it, because it gives them some long range punch on open boards.
Yeah, I guess the only issue with it really is the Akathist can't be a heavy specialist. Only a Rack Gunner can be a heavy specialist.
Yeah.
So, and since the Hex Rifle is a heavy weapon, anytime you move, you're taking that -1. And unlike the Cabalites, they're not going to be ignoring obscurity or long range or anything crazy like that. So,
yeah,
you have to kind of weigh that when you're deciding to run a Hex Rifle.
Yeah. Like more often than not, I'm finding on open boards with this model, I'm kind of just like setting it up so that it has clear lines of sight onto things like mid-board objectives. That way, I'm taking as little penalties as possible. But then this model is also usually going to be equipped with a Venom Blade, so it can actually go and get stuck in. So it takes this great melee model and it turns it into a pretty potent flex model, which is just awesome.
Yeah. Also, shout out to the Stinger Pistol.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people forget that this is a separate weapon from the Splinter Pistol.
Yeah.
It's just a pistol, except it wounds on a roll of 2 always. This is kind of neat. Just thought I'd highlight this. It is a pretty decent option. It does cost 1 point extra on the Akathist, but yeah, it's probably worth looking at.
Yeah, if you have a point laying around in your list, might as well throw the Stinger Pistol on your Akathist.
Okay, so let's talk about the Covens, you would call them. I mean, these ones kind of have different names rather than just like Cabal cults.
Yeah. Do you want to talk about the Grotesque first?
That
because
is a good
idea. They fit the same mold.
Yeah. Grotesques are they also benefit from the subfactions that racks do. They're the only like elite option for one of the 3 like archetypes like I talked about. It's kind of like the Terminator that Drukhari gets.
Yeah.
I mean, for such an it's 38 points, right? I believe I'm correct about that.
Yeah.
38 points, yeah, for a Grotesque. So, I mean, I'll just read it out. It's still fast, like a normal elf. It's 7 inches, which is pretty nuts when you think about it.
Yeah.
It's got that weapon skill 3. It's strength 5, toughness 5, which is really nice. 4 wounds, 4 attacks, 8 leadership, and then it's got the invuln and it's got power from pain. So this thing is incredibly hard to kill.
Yeah.
And it gets Monstrous Cleaver and Flesh Gauntlet. Monstrous Cleaver is just it's strength user, so strength 5, AP 2, and it gets an additional attack, so it gets 5 attacks with that.
Mm-hmm.
And then it can take the Flesh Gauntlet, so if you're against like an invuln save or the AP isn't going to come in handy, you might as well roll for the Flesh Gauntlet instead to try to get mortal wounds.
Exactly.
Anything else you want to say about the Grotesque?
I don't think I've ever taken the liquefier gun on it.
Yeah, it can take a liquefier.
That's about it. It can be a combat or a zealot specialist. You can make it a demo if you want to take the liquefier gun. I just think you're playing with the model against type if you're doing that. Yeah.
The first time I ever heard about Grotesques was Alec Berryman at LVO had an option in his roster in case he had to play against Custodes, where he would bring 2 Grotesques and like
That's
a rack
right.
list. And I believe he ran into Custodes and he had to do that list and he won.
Yeah. Was he just like fixing or fishing for 6s with the Flesh Gauntlet, or?
I think it was just the idea was he was basically just tying up the Custodes with a model that the Custodes probably won't even be able to kill.
Right.
Just between the invuln and the feel no pains and the 4 wounds and toughness 5, you charge a custodian with a Grotesque, and then the custodian fails to kill it, and then the Grotesque just falls back next round, and suddenly 2 of the 4 rounds in the game, your custodians are doing nothing.
Just completely shut down. Yeah. All right. So yeah, let's talk about the Homunculi covens now.
So the first one, and this is the one that you're going to see almost every single time, is the Prophets of Flesh. So that 5-up invuln that all Rex and the Grotesque get, it becomes a 4-up invuln. And this makes them like one of the most like durable models for like points cost efficiency in the game.
Mm-hmm.
Really only losing out to like a shield drone.
Yeah.
Weirdly enough. They are, I mean, 4-up invuln is incredible. When you have this many models, having like a coin flip ability to like make it live is just really powerful.
Yeah.
This is pretty much, this is what you're running, Ryan. This is what everybody seems to run. With their racks.
Yeah.
But there are other options.
Yes,
there are options. The Dark Creed. Do you want to talk about this one?
Yeah, so when a opponent takes a nerve test for a model from their kill team, they must add 1 to the test for each of your models other than shaken models that is within 3 inches of that model.
It's kind of interesting.
It's interesting, just because it's all about the morale phase really with these guys. It's thematic, but it's just like compared to Prophets of Flesh, it just doesn't hold a candle, in my opinion.
For each model from your kill team, and if you're running a horde of racks,
I see what you're getting at.
You're not going to be flesh wounding that often, but say you get like a few racks locked onto one guy, and there's also like a Clavex nearby, and you flesh wound him. Pretty decent odds that guy might actually fail his nerve test.
Yeah.
Like a Space Marine, say he gets flesh wounded, and then he's near 3 racks or something. He's going down to like probably leadership 4. Just from that alone, it's pretty interesting. Probably wouldn't take it, but it's better than some of the other like quote unquote bad options that the other archetypes have.
Yeah, it's not like Cult of the Red Grief.
Yeah,
which is just
good grief. Cult of the Good Grief. I do want to talk about Coven of 12 though, because I think this one is really overlooked, and I think there could be something to it.
Ooh, okay.
So I'll read it out. Improve the armor penetration characteristic of all melee weapons used by a model on your kill team by 1. So AP 0 becomes AP 1, AP 1 becomes 2, and so on. With how cheap racks are, having their they've all got 2 attacks, weapons skill 3. Having their Homunculus Tools suddenly be AP 1, I mean, this really changes the outlook on these models, right?
Yeah, I think you're right.
I mean, they become threats all of a sudden.
Yeah, that is true. This is definitely like the melee offensive trait to take.
Yeah, and what sounds crazy to me is a Venom Blade.
4 I was just about to say.
3s, wounding on 2s, AP 1. That's strong.
And
the Electric Corrosive Whip becoming AP 3. I mean, really, running Coven of 12 with a horde of racks, just with Homunculus Tools, and then, you've got your Akathist. It's almost like it's better than like a Witch Horde, like with the Witch Finders.
Absolutely.
It's like a bet. Like, you don't get a 4-up invuln, but a 5-up invuln is still pretty good, especially with Toughness 4.
Yeah.
I just don't see why this hasn't been looked at least once. I've never seen anybody do it.
Yeah.
Like, I get it. 4-up invuln is amazing. It is probably better most of the time, but Coven of 12 is something that I want to try at some point.
Yeah, I think it could work.
Yeah, I think it totally could. I don't know how it would work in practice, but like making it to round 3 where suddenly you have all these guys like with 2 attacks hitting on 2s, wounding on 4s, AP1. Like, I don't know, these models are not too bad. Yeah, I'd like to look at it. I'd like to see somebody try this out because I think there's something there. Granted, it's a little bit more inflexible because you're going to be running a lot of racks, which means you have less spaces on your roster for other things. But yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, so that does it for, I guess, all of the base, all of like your base models for Drukhari, and all of the Drukhari obsessions. But there are some models that Drukhari have access to that do not benefit from any of those subfaction traits that you can just plug into any roster that is built around either Cabalites, Witches, Racks, or Grotesques.
Yes, the Blades for Hire.
Yep.
That's what they're called. So there's 2 of them. 2 data sheets. There's the Incubi and the Mandrakes. Which should we talk about first?
Let's talk about the Incubi.
So they have pretty much a standard Incubus has the normal build like data sheet that most elves do, except they have 3 attacks and a 3-up save, which is really interesting, and leadership 8. And it's armed with a Clave, which is just strength +1, AP 3, 1 damage. So they go up to strength 4 with AP 3. And they have the Tormentor's ability. So any models within 3 inches of an Incubi has to basically add 1 to nerve tests that they take.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of leadership stuff going on with Drukhari that I think could be explored. I don't know how many people have really tried to go all out on a build like that, but maybe there's something there. But the real treat here is the Clavex, which is the Sergeant type for the Incubi.
Yes.
It's the same thing, except it has 4 attacks instead of 3, and it has 2 wounds instead of 1, and it has LD9 instead of LD8. And on top of that, it has the Lethal Precision ability. This is only for the Clavex. If you get a wound roll of 6 with your Clave, then you add 2 to damage characteristic, basically making it a damage 3, AP 3 weapon.
That's very important right there, that special ability, Lethal Precision. Say I'm playing and I'm using a Clavex. When I'm rolling my attacks for this model, how should I be rolling them? Should I be rolling them all at once, or should I be like slow rolling my wound rolls, or how should I be rolling?
Slow rolling, definitely, because picture this: you get like 3 hits through, and then you roll all your wounds at once, and you get like you're winning on a 3, say, and then you get 2 3s and a 6. Your opponent then can say, okay, well, I'm going to try to save the ones that aren't a 6 first, because if you're going to get to the injury roll, I want it to be 1 damage. So slow roll your wounds. So that way, if the 6 comes up, they have no choice but to immediately try to save it.
Yeah.
I guess. Because if they have the choice to save them in any particular order, they're not going to save the 6 first, because then they're opening themselves up to taking a 3 damage injury roll, which is basically death.
Yeah.
You're usually going to make a Clavex a Zealot specialist. I think I mentioned earlier that you're probably not going to make a Sybarite a Zealot. The reason for that is because the Zealot is usually going to be your Clavex, because this will take him to strength 5.
Right.
5 attacks, hitting on 3s, wounding on 3s against just about anything, with the upside of 3 damage potentially.
Yeah. And then round 3, it's going to be hitting on 3s, or excuse me, hitting on 2s. So
Yeah.
it's a crazy model. The thing that I like about this model the most, honestly, aside from its offensive output, is its defensive capabilities. Because unlike the rest of the Drukhari models, for the most part, or at least I should say, the Racks and the Mandrakes, which benefit from a invulnerable save, this model has just a 3-up armor save. And so your opponent is kind of put in a tough spot when it comes to what kind of weapons should I be taking against this Drukhari list? Should I be taking a lot of models with a high rate of fire that shoot a lot of shots but are or what are a little weaker, or should I be taking something like a melt-a-gun or a rocket launcher or the heavy weapons platform, one of their, like the Star Cannon, I think, in order to get like high damage, high AP. This model makes it so that it's like, you kind of should be taking both. You're putting your opponent in a tough spot by including this model.
Yeah, I agree. That's like such a problem with Drukhari is the Clavex really presents this different threat. They're not getting their durability from invulns. It's from, a good armor save and multi wounds, which is not what you're running into with most Drukhari models.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is like the Zealot Clavex is going to be an auto take a lot of the time.
I agree.
And if it's not a Zealot, it's like a combat. If you're against T3, for instance, and Strength 5 isn't going to help you, then you might as well make him a combat. But the Clavex is very good. It's going to be like an auto take and Drukhari list for the most part.
Should we move on to the Mandrakes now?
Sounds like a plan.
Okay.
Oh, and obviously, I mean, you kind of mentioned this before, but it's good to keep in mind that despite the fact that Mandrakes and Incubi are getting power from pain, they're not benefiting from any of these subfactions that we went over before. So you might be taking your Mandrakes and your Incubi with, say, a bunch of Racks, but you're not getting the 4-up invuln that the Racks are getting.
Yeah. So they've got 8-inch movement, which is, fantastic.
Wow.
Yeah. 3-up weapon ballistic skill. The big thing with them is they have strength 4, and they've got a lot of attacks, 3 and 4 for the Mandrake and the Night Fiend, which is like the Mandrake Sergeant model. They have got the Shrouded from Sight ability, which means that they subtract 1 from hit rolls for attacks that target the Mandrakes, and in addition, they get a 5-up invulnerable save. So they're hard to hit. They've got an invuln save. They're fast. They're good. They're good in melee because of that strength 4 with the volume of attacks that they have. And then they also have ranged capabilities, which just synergizes so well with the rest of the model. They get the Bale Blast, which is a 18-inch range assault 2 weapon with strength 4, AP 1. It does 1 damage. And then it has an ability where each time you make a wound roll of 6 up for this weapon, the target suffers a mortal wound in addition to any other damage. So it's fantastic. This is a fast-moving model. They have a huge threat range. They get 2 shots with an assault weapon. That's just great.
I was going to say, I think Mandrakes are like one of the best flex models in
Absolutely.
They are very good ranged. They are very good in melee. They're fast. By round 2, they're rerolling charges. They're like elusive in the sense that Toughness 3, 5-up invuln doesn't sound that hard to kill, but when you consider all the modifiers, when you're hitting them, and then the invuln and then the feel no pain, they are kind of in their own weird way durable.
Yeah. They are kind of up there in points for like this sort of faction. At coming in at 12 and 13 points for the Mandrake and the Night Fiend, but I think that's I still think that's kind of cheap for what they bring to the table, right?
For sure.
The melee weapon that they have is a Glimmer Steel Blade. So this is a melee weapon, obviously. Strength is user, so strength 4. AP 1 damage.
Yep.
But I mean,
just
it's
solid.
good.
Yeah, solid weapon.
Solid. Yeah.
And best part about Mandrakes, in my opinion, especially on an open board, is their deep strike tactic. We're going to talk about their tactics later, but any deep strike tactic that can bring in a model with a shooting attack is really good.
Yeah.
But when you bring in a model with a shooting attack that also has melee capabilities, it just kind of goes over the top with what you're able, like how quickly you can adapt to different situations, just kind of on the fly with Mandrakes. Like you drop in 3 of them anywhere on the board, basically more than 5 inches away from enemies. You get free shots off that your opponent can't really react to. And then turn 2, you're rerolling charges. So if you want to charge, that's an option now.
Yeah.
Or if you want to sit back and keep shooting, they're so fast that it's easy to kind of avoid your opponents and kind of just like play cat and mouse and take pot shots where you need to.
All right. So I think that's all of the models for Drukhari. Is that right?
Yeah, I think we covered every single one of them.
All right.
Other than commanders, but yeah.
Yeah. So let's go ahead now and get stuck in with their tactics.
They've got a lot of them. They've got a lot of good ones.
They do.
Right at the top. Pray they don't take you alive. Basically, when you kill an enemy leader, you spend 2 CP, and for the remainder of the battle, every model in the enemy kill team basically subtracts 1 from leadership. God, reading all this, there's just
there's like so much stuff to do with leadership in this faction. Yeah,
I think it'd be interesting to see somebody try and like craft an entire build around something crazy like this, like with like a rack build with like a bunch of incubi and stuff. I don't know.
I'm starting to think that that's the way that like Games Workshop would want to see people play this faction.
Yeah, for sure. And then like taking out the leader and like spending 2 CP to like scare the crap out of your opponent's models for the rest of the game. It's just it's thematic, right? It feels fluffy.
Yeah.
You're not going to use this too often though. I guess if even if you have 2 CP and you kill the enemy leader, I don't know if I'm going to actually think to use this.
Yeah. And if I'm up against a faction where they're like re-rolling, they're getting like a free re-roll to their nerve tests or whatever, then it's like,
Yeah.
Pretty
do you want to take Architect of Pain?
Yes. So this is 1 CP. Use this tactic at the start of the battle round. Choose a model from your kill team that has the Power from Pain ability. Until the end of the battle round, that model treats the current battle round as being 1 higher than it actually is when determining what bonuses it gains from the Power from Pain table. It's good. I mean, for 1 CP, I can't ask for it to be any cheaper. I would probably wind up using this tactic on, say, round 2 after I get a charge in with a Clavex. That way, the Clavex is going to be hitting on 2s.
Well, it's weird because you have to do it at the start of the round, so you can't see how the movement goes.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. That definitely pairs it back.
I think
super situational.
Maybe like round 1 on a close deployment, you would just pop this on a melee model so that way they can reroll charges. But like, when you think about it, it's like you might as well just spend a CP to reroll the charge if you need to.
So moving on.
Hyperstim. This is 1 CP. This is kind of similar to the other one, except it's basically you choose a model that has combat drugs at the start of the battle round and spend a CP, and then they double the bonus from combat drugs. And then at the end of the battle round, you roll a d6, and on a 1, they take a mortal. I don't run witches enough to think about this. I can't imagine. I mean, I guess doubling the bonus, so like strength +1 becomes strength +2, toughness +1 becomes. I mean, having a toughness 5 witch for a turn could be pretty interesting to just plug a hallway or something. I don't know.
Yeah, right.
I guess you could get like movement 12 on a witch, maybe with this.
That's pretty crazy.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's all kind of. It's another like very situational tactic. It's another tool in the toolbox for witch players.
Yeah.
That's what it is.
If you are super cognizant of the board state and exactly what your win condition is, there might be a scenario where this comes into play, provided that you have the right combat drugs.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. It's never happened to me. Well, I guess I don't play witches, but I've never seen it happen. So I don't know.
Yeah. So the next one up is lightning fast reactions. This is 1 CP. You use this tactic when a model from your kill team is chosen as the target of an enemy attack in the shooting or fight phase. Your opponent must subtract 1 from hit rolls that target this model for the rest of the phase. So the first thing that pops into my head when I see this is making a Mandrake. If my opponent wants to shoot a Mandrake, popping that on him, and then you're gonna need to be hitting him on a 6.
Yeah, probably. Basically, what's nice about this is after you get to choose to use it when they're targeted, so it's not like at the start of the round or something.
Yeah.
And on top of that, it's for the whole phase. So if you have one model that is like in like an important area or like on an objective that you think your opponent is like really going to be interested in taking them off the board, you could just pop this tactic the second they start shooting at them with the first model,
Mm-hmm.
and then suddenly they're -1 to hit from that model, and they're -1 to hit from everything else that's going to be attacking them for the rest of that round. So you can get crazy value out of this.
Yeah. And once again, at 1 CP, it's pretty economic.
Next up is Bloodied Grace. So this is another witch tactic. 1 CP, basically, when a witch would consolidate, you could do 6 inches instead of 3 inches. Pretty situational.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it is interesting, the idea that you can lock some, like after getting a kill with a witch fighter, you say there's a model you want to consolidate into that's like 6 inches away, like a gunner or something. That can be really useful because next turn, basically, they're not going to be able to shoot, and they might not be able to fall back because of the witch ability, where they have to roll off with you.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I can see that I can see that coming into play. It's another thing to be aware of if you're running witches. Situational, but definitely useful when it can come up, I think.
Yeah. The next one here is Hunt from the Shadows. Use this tactic, or excuse me, this is 1 CP. Use this tactic when a model from your kill team is chosen as the target of an enemy attack in the shooting phase and it is obscured. Until the end of the phase, add 1 to that model's saving throws. So this is going to be turning things like your Rax invuln saves from being a 4-up to being a 3-up, given that they're obscured. So pretty nice.
Yeah, my favorite use of this. My favorite use of this is I've had somebody like shoot like an incubi or a Clavex, and it's obscured, and I've popped this tactic to basically give my Clavex a 2-up armor save instead of a 3-up against the Flamer.
Very nice.
That's pretty crazy. Unfortunately, this is only in the shooting phase, so you can't like charge something and then like take the Overwatch from a Flamer and then use this tactic.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, though, pretty interesting.
Yeah.
I've heard some people, like I've heard some arguments about like using this on invuln saves because I think there's something in the core book that states that invuln saves can't be modified.
Okay.
I don't know how much that this applies because you're not modifying the invuln save itself. You're just modifying the roll. I'm not too sure about that interaction. It's not really something that's come up too often for me because I don't run that many racks when I do run racks. It's usually like I'll have a couple of racks and they're usually in combat, or it's like a Flamer.
That's definitely something to look into. And when in doubt, regarding that sort of thing, ask your tournament organizer if you're playing in a tournament.
I guess let's move on to the next thing. I see from Out of the Shadows, this is the Mandrake Deep Strike that we were talking about earlier. It's just a standard Deep Strike ability. It's 1 CP. You can place 3 Mandrakes down more than 5 inches away from enemy models. This is insane. It's probably the best Deep Strike ability in the game. Yeah, I mean, anything else to say about it? It's very good.
Nope. It's so good, man.
Yeah, shoot, charge if you want. Maybe shoot more if you want. It's up to the model.
Yeah.
I guess moving past that, there's Fire and Fade.
Yeah, this is another great one. Uh, 1 CP. Use this tactic after a model from your kill team shoots in the shooting phase. The model can immediately make a normal move up to 7 inches as if it were the movement phase. So, great ability. Asuryani have this same ability. I believe Harlequins do as well.
Elves, yeah.
Yeah, it just gives you a great it gives you great flexibility. It allows you to just do things outside of the normal order of play, I guess, as you would call it. So like you can just like a hypothetical, you can move up a Cabalite gunner. You can advance with him. He shoots his shot at a enemy model that is on an objective, and then you spend 1 CP to fire and fade onto that objective. He's controlling that objective now. Situations like that make this tactic very powerful.
Yeah. Also, one thing I like is we talk about how the Darklands is a heavy weapon, so you can't move and shoot.
Mm-hmm.
If you ready the Dark, even if it's in a spot where it's kind of dangerous, if it's readied, it gets to shoot first. So say you ready the Darklands, you shoot, and then you fire and fade into safety. And the next turn, you don't have to move because you've just moved with the last fire and fade.
Right.
Now you're not taking the penalty. You've already gotten somewhere where you might need to be, or you've just moved into safety. So it's like an interesting way to move your heavy weapons without having to worry about the penalty. Then there's Cruel Deception, which is basically it's the Asuryani feigned retreat, but for Drukhari. After you fall back, you can spend a CP, and then you're still able to shoot this battle round. So this and Fire and Fade just really kind of boosts we like to talk about the action economy in Kill Team.
Right.
And factions that can, I guess, alter this they benefit greatly from it. So Cruel Deception, Fire and Fade, you can even use these together. It's a couple of really strong tactics. Always going to be useful, I think.
The one thing about this tactic is I use it a lot when I'm tied up in combat with Mandrakes, or when my Mandrakes are tied up in combat, I should say. And then you can actually chain it into Fire and Fade, right? So that's super interesting. The thing with the models like Cabalite gunners is if those models are getting charged, you're probably going to be in a bad spot anyways, just because they're a single wound toughness 3 with just a 5-up save. So don't really count on those models to survive close combat enough to be able to use this tactic, but if they do, this is a great tactic to use to get that blaster or that dark lance back online.
So now the Taste of Pain.
Yeah.
This is kind of a cool tactic, actually. I never ended up using it throughout the tournament, but it's one that I was always kind of looking at. It just never kind of came up for me. It's 1 CP. Basically, after a model suffers a flesh wound, until the end of the phase, you add one of the attacks characteristic of that model, and you ignore the penalty to that model's hit rolls from any flesh wounds that it suffered. I mean, it's kind of crazy that it's almost like a gritted teeth.
Yeah.
Plus, you get an extra attack, assuming that you get charged and then you get to fight back after.
So up next, we've got the Torment Grenade. So we were talking a little bit about the Phantasm grenade launcher earlier, and it's just a weird weapon. So use this tactic when you choose a model in your kill team to shoot with a Phantasm grenade. If an enemy model is hit by any attacks made with that weapon this phase, then in addition to the normal effects, roll 3d6. If the result is higher than the target's leadership characteristic, it suffers 1 mortal wound. And this tactic costs 2 command points. Is this the worst Drukhari tactic, Shane?
Well, I mean, 3d6. I don't know.
It's 2 CP to potentially inflict a mortal wound.
I mean, it's unlike. So, I mean, people look at stuff like Mind Shackle Scarabs, and that's 2d6 just to get to shoot with the model. This 3d6 to inflict a mortal wound if it's higher than leadership. Obviously, you're picking and choosing. You're not going to do this against a Necron. But 3d6, the average roll is like a 10.
Mm-hmm.
So it is better. Like, if you do hit, granted, you have to pop the tactic before you hit. So, I mean, if, like, I don't know, if you have, like, a Sybarite with, like, Flayed Skull, you're probably going to hit. There is a pretty decent chance you can get the mortal wound. I mean, the odds are in your favor that you're going to get that one mortal wound.
Mm-hmm.
If this was D3 mortal wounds, it would jump to, like, fully viable, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Right now, I do think it's actually decent. It's just the fact that it's 2CB means you're not going to use it that often.
Yeah.
But yeah, if this was D3 mortal wounds, it would almost be like, it's just kind of like Hellfire Shells, but probably easier because Blade Skull.
Yeah.
I mean, 3d6 is it's decent, right?
Yeah.
I don't know. It's not
just
terrible.
2 CP, and it's like if my Cyberite has like a blast pistol or something like that, I'd rather shoot the blast pistol than jump through all these hoops and spend all that CP, you know?
Yeah.
What I mean, am I going to have a blast pistol on a Cyberite? Am I going to have a Cyberite? If I don't even have a Cyberite, then I'm not even going to be able to use this tactic anyways. So it's a lot to invest, I think.
And yeah, unfortunately, the Phantasm grenade launcher is only 18-inch range, so it's not like you can even like snipe things out with it. It's like kind of close range.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess Murderous Rivalries the next one. Do you want to take this?
Yeah, so this is 2 CP. Use this tactic at the start of the Hammer of Wrath section of the fight phase. The first time it is your turn to choose a model that charged to fight with, you can instead choose 2 models from your kill team that ended their charge moves within 4 inches of each other. You can resolve both models' attacks before any other player chooses a model to fight with. I've never been in a situation where I've been able to use this tactic, or at least I should say I've been cognizant of the fact that I was able to use this tactic, but I like this tactic a lot.
Yeah, it's one of those ones where it's just very obviously quite situational, but the situations where you can use it, it's just clearly good.
Yeah.
If you can recognize, the hardest part about it is recognizing when to use it.
Yeah.
Because I think it's easy to be like, oh, I can use it now. But then you think about it, it's like, well, I don't really have to. It's like, because I'm probably attacking first anyway. Basically, if you charge somebody and then a guy within 4 inches maybe got counter charged and you feel comfortable fighting with both of those models, then you can do something there, I guess.
Yeah. I recently played a game against Bjornid where I think you were watching it, Shane, and we got into round 4, and he had like 4 Raveners on the middle objective, and I had like 4 or 5 Racks on the middle objective, and we each had multiple models that had charged into this melee, and I think that tactic would have been helpful in that situation.
Yeah, probably, yeah. Yeah, I mean, so that's all the tactics, pretty much. I mean, there's commander ones, but we're not really going to get too much into that. So, well, I mean, I guess we could talk about matchups. We can talk about just generally speaking. Like, I would say formats, but I feel like Drukhari are such a good overall faction that there really isn't a format where they fall out of favor.
You know, they can play the hold game with their racks. They can play more offensively with their witches and with the Cabalites. They're a very flexible faction. All of the models, I would say, are like, there's nothing that's like overcosted, that's for sure. And I would say a lot of their models are probably undercosted by a little bit just because of what they can bring. And the fact that like they're getting a new subfaction trait every turn as the game goes on, like that definitely increases like the value that is not listed in terms of points cost. Their value is a lot higher. They're very cost efficient faction.
For sure. Yeah, it's weird. It's almost like it's like different factions entirely. looking between like a rack build and a witch build, or like a
Yeah.
Cabalite build. And what ties them together is the Mandrakes and the Clavex most of the time. But I think there's one thing that we haven't talked about that has been talked about before, that has been kind of speculated about, and that is the soup, the Drukhari soup.
Ooh, okay.
And so this is something that you can do this.
Yeah.
And when I say soup, what I'm referring to is obviously if you take a witch cult, you can't bring racks. You can't bring Cabalites. Otherwise, you lose the subfaction bonus. But what some people have done before is they've looked at these data sheets and said, you know what, Akathists are really strong. Cabalite gunners are really strong. Witch fighters are pretty strong. Do they need those subfactions?
Yeah.
Maybe let's just run all those models. And I mean, Power from Pain is basically a bunch of subfactions already. Why not just run all these models together?
Yeah, that's a fair argument.
And it is interesting. In my opinion, I think, like, personally, I think witches aren't that viable in soup because of strength 3. It's really hard to overcome that. I mean, I guess if you are, then running Hydra Gauntlet so that you're at least rerolling wound rolls.
Yeah.
Would have to be the way to go. But I guess it's just the idea of running, like rack gunners and Cabalite gunners and, an Akathist all together, like with a Sybarite and a Hackatrix. I kind of get the appeal to it. I don't think it's.
I mean, I'm getting the appeal to it. Yeah, consider me appealed.
Yeah, it's certainly interesting because a lot of these models are already good without the subfaction.
Yeah.
Especially the Cabalite gunners. I mean, those are the obvious ones, right?
Yeah, for sure.
It's something worth looking into, for sure. It's not really the current meta Drukhari. It's not what people are doing, but there might be a build in there.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, the idea of running like a Grotesque with like 2 Cabalite gunners and then a bunch of Mandrakes is kind of nuts, right?
That's absolutely nuts, yeah. Yeah, that's super interesting. Yeah. Something to consider for sure. So is there any faction in your mind that possesses or that is just like a hard matchup for Drukhari?
So I guess Drukhari, they really fit the T3 mold. Outside of the Clavex, who's going to like present a few problems, you can really run like an anti-toughness 3 list and kind of mow them down that way. Like I think what we saw from Micromancer during the Transatlantic Open finals with like spamming hotshot volley guns and like having Gottfried and just kind of focusing on volume of attacks at like strength 4 minimum.
Yeah.
Is it can give them a lot of trouble. Back at BAO when I was prepping, Drukhari was one of the main things I was worried about. And the Blood Angels half of my roster was just like the perfect anti-Drukhari build. It was just volume of attacks. It was a ton of chainsword attacks. It was bolt guns. I was
Storm bolters. Yeah.
Storm bolters. You're not spending points on the expensive power weapons because it's pretty much overkill against Drukhari. You want volume of attacks at strength 4. That's what's going to scare them. That's what's going to keep them up at night. I guess looking at it from like they aren't that durable. Like, I mean, when you look at it from volume of attacks, this is something that beats the Mandrakes, beats the Racks, it beats Cabalites. It's going to do fine against witches. It's fine everywhere. The only issue is you're going to need at least one thing that's capable of high AP multi-damage, maybe, just to deal with the Clavex.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the current there's so many formats that you can play Drukhari in. They're never going to be bad. I think that's one of the reasons why we see so many players that seem to only play Drukhari. Because why would you ever stop? Because they're always viable.
Yeah.
They can kind of always win a tournament.
Yeah. I'm trying to think if there's any sort of faction that really has an answer to all 3 different Drukhari subgroups. I like Tau on an open board, I think, possesses a genuine threat to them.
Yeah, I can see it.
Imperial Guard, obviously. Admech. Admech is another one.
Yes.
Just because of yeah, you can go ahead and talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I built this is on the Patreon a little bit, but there was a list I made that was pretty good anti T3 that was kind of specifically with Drukhari in mind.
Mm-hmm.
But it's kind of like what we're saying over and over again, right? It's just high volume of attacks, not a focus on AP, but getting wounds through at the end of the day is what's going to give them trouble.
Yeah.
When the points you're spending on the AP, it's not going anywhere. They're just eating a 5-up in Vuln, regardless whether it's a bolt pistol or it's a power hammer, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, do we want to talk about basically the list that we were running at TAO, just to kind of give an example of what a Drukhari command roster is looking like in that sort of format?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it was kind of Mandrake spam.
Yeah. That's like the core of it, right? And I feel like that still holds true in a lot of other formats, but it's basically like you cherry pick the units that you need from either Racks, Witches, or Cabalites. So like the Cabalite Gunners, the Witch Fighters, less so for the Racks, but you get the point. And then just filling out the rest of the roster, honestly, with Mandrakes, because those flex models are so great.
Yeah, Mandrakes and then the Clavex, the Zealot Clavex.
Yeah, exactly.
And I mean, it's pretty easy to build a roster with all the different types on there with like 3 different subfactions, because the meat of each list is going to be the Blades for Hire, the Incubi, the Mandrakes, the Clavex, the models that aren't going to need a subfaction in the list.
Yeah. The list that we had brought it didn't include all 3 subgroups, but one player's list who did include all 3 subgroups was Danger Froze, who actually took second in the TAO, and he literally had his command roster was basically just like 3 different lists, right? It was Witches,
3 lists.
Yeah, Witches, Racks, Cabalites, and then each one just had a certain amount of Mandrakes thrown in there just to fill it out, basically. The model's so good. You just fill it out, and it's just instant upside.
Yeah, no, for sure. And honestly, it's with Danger's roster, he never even brought the Witches, so he could have actually kind of like gave himself more options.
Yeah.
With between the Racks and the Cabalites, which is what he ended up running every single time.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's kind of the way to go when roster building for a tournament is, I think you kind of narrow down the 2 types that you want.
Mm-hmm.
And like say for Worldwide Open, you want to go Cabalites for the open board, but for Arena you want to run Witches. Kind of have like your split of different options for the Witches and then different options for the Cabalites, depending where it is that you are. And then, because I think once you have all 3, it starts to become a little bit difficult, and you kind of like you lose a little bit of flexibility there. Granted, it's still good because you have 3 different lists that all do different things, so there's still quite a bit of flexibility in and of itself. But I guess that's probably how I try to approach it.
All right, so is there anything else for Drukhari that you think we may have missed? I guess the only thing that I have is for tips for playing against Drukhari on an open board. If you see Mandrakes on your opponent's list, you definitely want to screen out your deployment. That's probably, if you've learned nothing else in how to play against Drukhari from this Drukhari deep dive, it's that. That sort of thing, that screening out the backfield against Drukhari was how we saw, Matthew Fong wind up taking TAO. That was a huge part of his strategy.
Yep. And I mean, it's easier when you're playing like a Militarum that has the bodies to do that.
Mm-hmm.
On an open board, I mean, sometimes it feels like it's impossible to counterplay deep striking. Like something that I was thinking about was while I was bringing 3 Mandrakes in reserve, also throwing like a Dark Lance in reserve with the intent of just dropping the Dark Lance on a board edge in my deployment zone for free. And it's like my opponent is simultaneously trying to deep strike their own back line while also trying to hide from the Dark Lance that's got 36-inch range.
Yeah.
It just becomes kind of overwhelming to deal with.
Yeah. That's huge. That's something that I wish I wound up doing in TAO, and I never did. I just deployed it straight out there every time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, the instinct is to deploy it out there and just ready it. But
yeah.
There's a lot of tricky things you can do with reserves when it comes to long-range weapons.
So we're coming up on almost 2 hours of recording time, so I think we're going to end the Drukhari deep dive here. Thank you all so much for listening to this episode of the Command Point Podcast. If you enjoy this type of content, consider supporting us over on our Patreon. Don't forget to subscribe, and we will see you all